So a few years back, I was watching some TED Talks that Penn State was doing. They were streamed live, and I clicked on, and I wanted to see a talk in particular that was being delivered by a professor at Penn State, a new professor, on death. And I'm interested in death because, we're all going to die. And I clicked in, and I thought, whoa, okay, that's really fascinating. I should have this person come to this class and do that same talk. And then I just never did. And then the next semester happened, and I kept saying, I would see things around campus, and I could say, I got to bring her in. And I never did. And then I got an email asking if I could publicize an event or a summer program that's happening in May down in Philadelphia. And I said, better yet than publicize, why don't I bring you in? And so that very professor is here today, and I want to introduce you to Dr. Janine Staples, who is... And there's her Twitter handle. And so, and I said, just come in and sell the program and just bring your cool energy into the room. And so, first question, let's start with the first slide, my friend. Say, can you tell us something about this?
Yes, can everybody hear me? Hi, I'm Janine Staples. I am Associate Professor of Literacy and Language, African American Studies, and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. I founded and produced a course called the Philadelphia Urban Seminar. We offer it out of the College of Education. And I produced this course as a response to the prevalence of white supremacy and white supremacist patriarchal ideology in particular. I'm very interested in the ways that we can train teachers or anyone who's interested in education to understand how the patriarchy works in real life, how it affects people in schools and in society.
How come she isn't on green,
and what they can do to actually shift the effects of that ideology through teaching, through learning, through counseling, through advising, through activism inside of a school space and an urban community. And so the course has been in play this is our 10th year, so it's our 10th anniversary coming up right now. And just as a show of hands, how many people in here are even interested in urban education or in the city, in urban context or the city at all? Just a handful of people. How many people are interested in understanding racism, sexism, misogyny, any sort of phobias? Okay, a few more people. Good. Okay. So one of the things that we ask ourselves in the College of Education and also in liberal arts, where I'm in AFAM or in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, is how can we understand the phenomena of white supremacy and patriarchal ideology, and how can we actually do something about it in a very practical and tangible way, as opposed to only just talking it through and understanding it in theoretical perspectives. What can we do actually on the ground? And the way that you can move in terms of creating shift and creating change is by understanding the effects of the ideology. How does it change people's lives? How does it change contexts? And then figure out where you fit in to interrupt that process. And so I'm here to invite people to ask me questions about that experience, to listen to me story a little bit about that experience, and I'll be talking to Dr. Richardson about that experience, and inviting you to join me in Philadelphia, May 19th through June 1st, for a 3-credit course where you can be on the ground with me, making a real change.
So I have this idea that if in teaching this class, I could get a lot done if I, for example, just got people to establish new friendship groups.
Yes.
Or if I got people to date across ancestry boundaries.
Literally date.
What's that?
Date,
yeah, go out on dates with people.
Sure.
Like if I just, instead of 119 if one of our assignments was, if we set up a dating app, our own Social 119 Tinder, and
why not?
I could make far more progress. We could make far more progress in the world of race relations than.
It's possible.
Yep.
Definitely possible.
So my question to you, one of the things that when I think about this, I think, wow, if I could get every student in 119 to do something like this, it would be really cool.
Yes.
And in your own words, why and how would it be cool?
Well, it would be cool because one of the reasons that racism, sexism, any sort of phobia persist in our country is because there are not enough people, particularly in majority culture, who understand what it's like to think about race and think about gender and think about complex issues of identity constantly and all the time. And so there's typically a lack of stamina and a lack of awareness in a lot of people in relation to those issues. So coming to Philly and being in the space for 2 weeks and connecting with me and my teaching team so that you're in a context where that's all you're thinking about, reading about, writing about, and not having these distractions whereby you're able to escape the pressures of the experience provides you with uncommon insight and access points and vantage points which build your empathy in a greater capacity, greater than anything that you can have otherwise.
Hey, what are some of those pressures?
Oh, wow. So there's 3 things that I talk about in the Philadelphia Urban Seminar when students come in and they work with me. There's sort of like a trifecta of experience that happens when people are really, really sort of affected and oppressed by these isms, the racism, the sexism, the misogyny. And there is cognitive dissonance. You know what that is, cognitive dissonance? It's where you hold 2 competing ideas in your space at the same time and try to make sense of them. And then there is emotional tax. That's where you are feeling the emotional effects of something that oppresses you or that stresses you or that causes anxiety without interruption. And then there's something called somatic pain. So if you're experiencing cognitive dissonance constantly, and if you are experiencing an emotional tax constantly, you're going to feel it in your body. So we do work in somatic health inside of the course where we work on understanding how to be in the body. There's a lot of mindfulness work that we do in the course. So when people who are not accustomed to sort of being really entrenched in that experience all the time are placed inside of an urban context and inside of a space where we are thinking about those issues, looking at and working with children who are experiencing those issues regularly and all the time, you develop this capacity to manage cognitive dissonance. You develop a capacity to manage somatic pain. And you develop a capacity that actually supports you in governing yourself when you're created with this emotional tax. So you can mature really a lot faster. You get like a more powerful repertoire and a greater amount of speed. And you come out actually falling in love. It's so interesting that you would mention love, because it's typical that when people start out with me in the beginning of the 2-week experience, there's a lot of strangers in the room. There are a lot of people who don't know each other. There are a lot of people who feeling nervous about living in the city for 2 weeks, feeling nervous about the course load, the readings, and what's required. But by the end of the 2 weeks, having experienced that dissonance in a team together, having experienced that tax, and having experienced that pain together, making new memories, creating new inroads into all that we have access to when we grow up empathetically to other people's experience, people end up falling in love.
Very cool response, very cool answer, or response, or I don't know, very cool insight. I don't know what to say. One of the things that I find in teaching this class, and so there are a lot of folks here who haven't spent time in poorer areas, be they rural or urban, and we have a lot of international students.
Right.
And so people don't, we find these ways to separate ourselves from the inequality that exists. So paint a picture for people in here, because you're going to be able to do this much more effectively than I would, of a poor school. Because, we live, and I'm going to contextualize this just a little bit more, right? We live in this world of achievement ideology. So if you work hard, you're going to get ahead. And even if you go to a poor school, you just got to work a little harder. And in the end, we may not be at the same place in the starting line, but, you can catch up and you can move forward, right? So we live in that sense. And paint a picture of what you see and what you think people who've never seen that and never understood that, what they really need to know?
Well, a lot of people who have never been to an urban context or lived in an inner city, especially in a very socioeconomically depressed space, have a lot of assumptions around what constitutes misery or happiness inside the space. And so there are a lot of preconceived notions that come into the space. There are lots of stereotypical ideas that come into the space. But honestly, typically when people come into the city with us and actually are assigned to a school and work with kids for those 2 weeks, they find that you can find easily that you can grow this space of awareness around how people get happiness done inside of really complex areas. So there's music, there's laughter, there's jokes, there's connection, there's affection, there's love, there's all kinds of things that happen inside the space such that you can change the stereotypical drivers that media produce around the poverty and the misery that happens and that sort of excludes anything else as a part of the human experience. So walking into an elementary school, for example, that is in a really economically depressed inner city, you will often find a principal who cares and is doing his or her best to provide resources for that space. You'll find parents who come every day to check in with their teachers, to check in with their children. You'll find teachers who are vetted veterans who've been in there for 20, 25, 30 years who are fighting against the systemic injustices that keep them under-resourced. And you'll find children that are happy. And so when you can connect to the reality as opposed to a lot of the stereotypes that are pushed into our media floodgates, then you can, again, grow your capacity for connection and for understanding.
Yeah, I think that so a couple hours ago, I was on the phone with my colleague and friend in Haiti. Mm-hmm. You know, people go to Haiti and they just, the first thing they come back with is, the first thing they talk about is the poverty, right?
Yes.
And I said, but when you make friends in Haiti, and when you work in Haiti, and when you spend time there, and you really meet people, that's not the first thing you come back with. The first thing you come back with is connection.
Yeah.
And that's when somebody asks me about Haiti, I talk about my connections there. I don't talk about the poverty. And I think one of the things that I see in the United States, whether it's rural deprived areas or urban deprived areas, economically deprived or politically deprived, however, is that there's this big gulf because we don't meet, we don't engage, and so that all we can see are the differences instead of the similarities. And I love what you said, children laughing and teachers laughing and people engaged and people loving and people, and I think that it's just that difference that keeps us separated sometimes.
Right, and I want to be clear, of course, poverty is a problem. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Being under-resourced and having a detachment from wealth or abundance, at least material wealth or abundance, is definitely an issue. I'm not trying to say that it's no big deal. It is an issue, it is a problem. But one of the things that I like to fight against in relation to this course and in the context of this experience is to really disrupt the idea that anything associated with blackness, with brownness, is detached from laughter, happiness, health, wisdom, and wealth. That's not true, and those two are not mutually exclusive. And so me emphasizing the value that you could find in a poor area or in an under-resourced school is me emphasizing that there is wealth and abundance everywhere, even if it is outside of whiteness, sometimes especially if it's outside of whiteness. And disrupting the notions that a white or hypermasculinist or patriarchal framing for existence or for context is the norm or the standard or the most valued is a part of the work in Philly. It's really about waking up consciousness so that you can have new lenses and take them with you out into the world after you leave the course.
So give us an example. How old are the social studies textbooks in the average school compared with the wealthy, the school up on the main line or something?
So it depends on the school, and it depends on the neighborhood. But you could get textbooks that are 20 to 30 years older in a poor school than the textbooks that are in a new, highly resourced school. That's really old. Now, the ways that people make up for those curriculum dearths and those voids is by using the internet, that free space where you can find out lots of different information. You can go to websites to look up historical facts and to look up narratives to really understand lots of social, political, and national context, but it doesn't it doesn't do justice to the injustice of the lack of materials, for sure.
Hey, so can you just say something more about, I'll be talking about this later in the semester, but it'd be really cool to hear you start the conversation about the injustice of our immensely unequal education system, which I think that, you're hitting it, but it'd be really cool if you could go right down the center lane. That a lot of people, most people in here who went to very wealthy schools,
Sure.
they just don't understand how much that can get in the way and hold people, just get in the way, trip people up.
Yeah.
Why don't we have as many students coming from some of the schools where you'll be working at in May coming to Penn State as we do some of the other wealthier schools and so on?
Right. So what a lot of people don't realize, especially if you come from an advantaged background and if you've had lots of support structures moving you through an educational system, you're not clear that there's actually a pathway from K-12 all the way up through college, and there are systems in place and there are structures in place, there are supports in place that actually move you forward within that context so that you can arrive at these places. And so if there are leaky parts along the pipeline, K through 12 to college, there are just greater chances for people to fall through the cracks and for a lot of deleterious energies to get into the cracks. And so it very well may be the case that a child starting out in kindergarten and going in through elementary school might have parents who have lost their jobs, who were not highly skilled in the first place, who then turn to illegal activities to make ends meet. And then get caught up in the prison industrial complex because of the lack of justice within that. For example, people really committing petty crimes but getting felony charges because of their race or because of their socioeconomic class, for example. So that child in kindergarten who has a father or a mother or both parents who get caught up in the system, that's a leak in his funnel all the way to college. And it's a leak that can get repaired along the way, maybe through church, maybe through a government assistance program, maybe through a social program that's inside of the neighborhood, but those may be underfunded as well. And so that child may need to depend on relatives, for example. That child might get moved around. And so what we know is that a stagnant space is crucial for development in early childhood. Kids don't literally move from address to address. They have a better chance of setting up a routine and feeling stable so that they can focus in school, so that they can be available to experience, so that they can take in new knowledge. But if that leak happens and they're shuttled to an auntie or a grandmother or an uncle who needs to take care of them, the disruption has started. And then what we're doing is trying to play catch up with that kid. So by the time they get to middle school and puberty hits and they're interested in all kinds of new things outside of school, and there are very few people who are sort of telling that person what to do with their time, with their energy, with their resources, with their money, with their interests, that's where the leak really starts to rupture. That's where the pipeline starts to fall apart. That's why we need teachers who are inside of these contexts, counselors, administrators, policymakers, who can interrupt the leaks that are in the pipeline and to support children when they have this falling apart. And so when you have these leaks all the way up from K to 12, it is very difficult to catch up academically, socially, culturally to make it into a place like Penn State. It becomes less and less likely every single year that they get closer to graduation. But if we have highly skilled, incredibly thoughtful, sensitive, warm, loving teachers who are brilliant to man all of those places in the pipeline, we can catch more of those kids.
Or even if you have people who want to take 2 weeks out of their lives.
That's the beginning.
To just learn. Like, what's really cool about your program, and one of the reasons I really wanted you to come talk about it, is you don't have to even want to go into education. You could maybe never go into a classroom, but just take 2 weeks to learn about yourself and about the world in different ways.
We have majors who focus on education. We have psych, anthropology, biology. We've had majors from every walk of life from multiple campuses come through Philly.
Mm-hmm. Hey, so I'm gonna say something, and I want you to just give us your quick response. Mm-hmm. Yeah, quick, whatever. Your response, your Janine response. White supremacy.
Yes.
what do you think people, what would you want people to understand about white supremacy?
In the most
These
simple,
right here.
so in the most simple terms, white supremacist patriarchal ideology or idea that is an idea that whiteness is superior to any other racial category, and that other racial categories are inferior to whiteness. And that idea is fairly endemic in our society. It gets taken for granted. It's played out in the ways that we structure media, in the ways that we structure curriculum, in the ways that we structure experience, in the ways that we structure education. And so it's this elusive thing. It's in an undercurrent. It's not something that we have readily access to, but we can see it in the ways that it's playing out in our socio-political terrain right now. If anybody's watching the news or if anybody's keeping up with what's going on in society, you can see the rise of this idea that there's a competition among the racial categories or people who have these demographic claims. And so if we don't name it and really notice it in very specific and powerful ways, expose it, and then provide context within which people can talk about it and be very, very clear about the ways that it's formed and the ways that it functions, we won't interrupt it. We won't interrupt it. So one of the things that people say to me, because as Dr. Richard said, I study death and I study terror, and a white supremacist patriarchal ideology is connected to those phenomena. And so one of the things I know for sure is that there is just no way to interrupt any part of that ideology if we don't form really powerful contexts within which people can go and live. And connect and study and think outside of their regular context where they have lots of distractions, you've got lots of excuses, there are lots of ways that you can sort of like fall apart in your thinking, but in a context where it's like, this is a space dedicated to awareness and awakenings, dedicated to arguments and discussions, dedicated to sense making and memory production. It's dedicated to the illumination of this undercurrent so that we can wake up.
So it's like, I'm really struck often by how many, first off, people are just, it's one of these things that in particular white people are just, I find, afraid of that. It just feels like it's an attack, and but it's kind of like, but how do you know if you've never really engaged in a conversation? It would be like me as a man thinking I understand women, but I never actually sat as a fly on the wall in a room full of women talking about what it's like to be a woman. Forget about in public, forget about in a space like this. Just put 10 thoughtful women in a room and have them talk about being a woman and have me just listen in. I'm going to hear some things that are just going to blow my mind and have to transform the way I think about being a man and what it means to be a woman. It's going to transform it from me standing over here, observing on and thinking like, oh yeah, I get what it means to be a woman. You know, I get what I get what it means to not be white. It's like, no, you got to be in. Just be in. Don't be afraid. Just jump in the deep end and see.
Yeah,
So.
what I say is I create risky safe spaces, which means that it's a safe space within which to have the conversations and the discussions. But I do ask students, of course, to take risks, to put themselves out there by asking questions and by storying their own experience. But you're absolutely right. There's just no way to get access to Vantage Point in a way that you feel deeply affected and connected if you don't really connect to the space where people who are different from you are actually living and thriving and creating identity and experience.
Yeah. So so over the break I was in Iraq. My wife and I were in Iraq, and you can ask any number of Americans their opinions about what's going on in Iraq and so on. But man, when you're sitting in Iraq, I'm sitting there surrounded by Iraqis telling me stories.
Yeah.
It's completely transformative.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing that I try to do in this class is to get people to jump into those kinds of spaces that you're creating, and to say, no, I'm going to take this journey and I'm going to grow and I'm going to take the risks. And
it's important enough to care enough about other people and care enough about the society that we're building to want to have the access to the experience.
Yeah.
It's more than just talking about wanting a just world. It's more than just talking about wanting equity or standing for inclusion. Really taking the step to say, I would like to put myself inside of this container so that I can have access, so that I can have experience, and so that I can participate actively to really grow myself into new knowledge. That's key.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah. Okay, here's the last question.
Okay.
This is now more personal.
Yes.
Why do you do what you do? What keeps you in it?
I do what I do because I want to sleep at night. I don't want to live with myself and not have clear conviction that I am doing my part as a scholar, as an educator, as an activist, as an artist, to actually right the wrongs that are happening in schools and society. And I can do more than just being on this campus and teaching a class that meets once a week. I can actually go and live in the city, and I can take students with me and invite them into the experience. I can create the container. I can use my networks. I'm a native-born Philadelphian, and I can create spaces where people can have access, where people can have connection, where people can have community. And if I wasn't doing this work, I would feel ashamed.
Mm. And being a professor. Yeah. Cool.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Hey, so, and if students just want to take a class from you and they're not education majors, is that possible?
Yeah. So I teach a course called CI 492 right now. It's perceptual pedagogies, where I teach all about pedagogy. If you are interested in thinking about the ways that a philosophy of education gets built and how that affects policy curriculum, you can take that in the spring. I study women's terror narratives, so if there are any women in here, men can take it too, but if there are any women in here who want to study the terror narratives of women, especially black and brown girls and women, I teach a course called Identities and Justice in the fall of each semester, and you're welcome to take that too.
And men in particular would be...
Yeah, that's true. It would be good for men to take that class.
Yeah. Hey, awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, everybody, for having me. I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, and by the way, this is JD, who was a TA, who was sitting in this room. When were you? When were you in the room?
I was in the room in, oh my gosh, like 2012, I think.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And then you
2012.
did Teach for America.
I did the New York City Teaching Fellows,
Uh-huh.
and which is a program similar to Teach for America. And now I'm back getting my PhD, and I work with Dr. Staples at the Philly Urban Seminar.
Yeah, very cool, man.
Yeah.
And here you are, back killing it. All right, thanks, man. Be well.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, we got a funny piece for you.
Yeah.